silence had become the loudest sound inside Laura and Henry's house. After 7 years of marriage, what once was filled with laughter, plans, and late-night talks had turned into a cold space where every word seemed like a weapon. At the beginning, they were inseparable. Laura used to imagine the walls of their home echoing with children's laughter, toys scattered across the floor, and Sunday mornings filled with joy. But as the years passed without a child, those dreams began to fade. And with their absence came the bitterness. Henry's patience wore thin. "Have you thought about doing more tests? Maybe the problem is you," he would say, with that sharp, dismissive tone that cut Laura deeper than he realized. She tried to reason with him, reminding him that it takes two to create a family, and maybe they both should see doctors. But Henry always brushed it off, twisting everything back to her. To him, the fault was obvious, her. The arguments started small, whispered jabs here and there, but soon they erupted into constant fights. At the breakfast table, on the living room couch, even in front of relatives and friends, Henry threw cruel remarks. "A man without children is incomplete," he said once at a family dinner, his eyes glancing coldly at Laura. She wanted to disappear under the table from the weight of humiliation. At night, she would lie awake beside him, tears slipping silently down her cheeks while he turned his back and fell asleep. The bed that once felt warm and safe now felt like a frozen battlefield. What made it worse were the stares and whispers from outside. At gatherings, cousins and aunts asked shamelessly, "When will the children come?" Every time Laura forced a smile, her heart sank deeper. She became the object of pity, the woman who couldn't give her husband what he wanted most. Henry, meanwhile, grew distant. He compared himself to his colleagues and neighbors who proudly showed off their children. His frustration hardened into resentment. To him, Laura was not just a wife anymore. She was a failure. Then came the night that broke everything. After yet another heated argument, Henry's words came out cold and final. "I can't do this anymore. I want children and you can't give them to me. I want a divorce." The silence that followed was deafening. Laura felt her legs tremble, her chest tighten, as if the world had collapsed in an instant. The man she had trusted, loved, and dreamed of growing old with was now looking at her as if she were disposable. Her heart shattered into pieces that night. But what Henry didn't know, what he couldn't even imagine, was that this ending would mark the beginning of a story he would regret for the rest of his life. Henry wasted no time turning his cold words into action. Within days, the divorce papers were ready, as if he had been preparing for this moment long before he spoke it out loud. To Laura, it felt like her whole life had been signed away without hesitation, without even a second thought. At the notary office, she sat across from him with trembling hands, her heart heavy as stone. Henry, dressed sharply as always, treated the moment like a mere business transaction. He flipped through the pages with the same disinterest he might give to contracts at work. "Sign them, Laura. The sooner we end this, the better for both of us." She stared at him, searching for even a flicker of the man she once loved, the one who had promised forever. But there was nothing in his eyes, only distance, pride, and coldness. With tears blurring her vision, she signed her name, sealing the end of their marriage. Returning to what had been their home, Laura packed her belongings quickly. A suitcase with a few clothes, a box of books, and some keepsakes she couldn't bear to leave behind. Every corner of that house carried memories, but they no longer belonged to her. As she walked through the rooms one last time, she overheard Henry on the phone already speaking about new plans. The sting of betrayal sank deeper. He had erased her long before she had left. But the cruelest part wasn't just the divorce itself. It was what came after. Henry's family, eager to justify his decision, spread the story everywhere. He divorced her because she couldn't give him children. The rumor spread like wildfire through relatives, neighbors, and friends. Laura became the subject of pitying looks and whispered gossip. On the street, women approached her with insincere sympathy. "Stay strong, dear. God knows what He's doing," they would say, patting her hand. But behind their soft voices, Laura could hear the echo of judgment, as if she were defective, less of a woman. Nights in her tiny rented room were the hardest. She sat on the edge of a simple bed, staring at the peeling walls, and cried quietly so no one would hear. Each tear carried not just sadness, but the weight of humiliation. She had lost not only her husband, but also her dignity in the eyes of others. Yet, in the stillness of those nights, a small flame began to flicker inside her. A whisper in her heart told her this wasn't the end of her story. That somehow, beyond the pain and disgrace, something greater was waiting. What Laura couldn't see yet was that the rejection meant to destroy her would one day become the very fuel for her rebirth. The days after the divorce were some of the darkest in Laura's life. She woke up each morning staring at the cracked ceiling of her small rented room, asking herself the same painful question. Am I really the problem? Am I truly incapable of being a mother? The words Henry had thrown at her played on repeat in her mind like a cruel recording she couldn't turn off. But one morning, exhausted from carrying the weight of doubt, Laura made a decision. She was going to find out the truth for herself. No more living in the shadow of accusations. No more being defined by his words. She booked medical appointments, stepping into clinics with trembling hands and a heart full of fear. Blood tests, ultrasounds, endless consultations. The process was draining. Each waiting room was filled with anxiety. What if Henry was right? What if I'll never hold a child of my own? The thought gnawed at her like a parasite. Weeks passed until the day came when she sat in front of the doctor, clutching her purse so tightly her knuckles turned white. The doctor flipped through the folder, then looked at her with calm assurance. "Laura, all your results are perfectly normal. You don't have any fertility issues." Her breath caught. She blinked rapidly, unsure she had heard correctly. "No issues?" she whispered. The doctor nodded. "None at all. You are healthy. Many times women carry the blame unfairly, but half of infertility cases come from the man's side. Did your ex-husband ever get tested?" The words hit her like a lightning strike. Henry had never once considered being tested. He had never even entertained the possibility that the problem might lie with him. For years he had chosen the easier path, placing all the weight, all the shame, entirely on her shoulders. Laura left the clinic with tears running down her face, but for the first time, they weren't only tears of pain. They were tears of relief, of clarity. The truth had set her free. She wasn't broken. That night, lying in her small bed, she didn't cry herself to sleep. Instead, she smiled softly in the dark. The chains of humiliation were beginning to fall away. She whispered to herself, "I am not worthless. I am not barren. I am more than what he said I was." It wouldn't erase the hurt overnight, but that moment planted something new inside her, a spark of courage, a determination to start over. She no longer carried Henry's lies as her truth. From that day on, Laura would rebuild her life, brick by brick, on her own terms. And she had no idea that this discovery was just the first step towards a future brighter than anything she had ever imagined. Starting over is never easy, especially when you're carrying the heavy weight of rejection and humiliation. Every morning, Laura woke up in her tiny rented room, its peeling paint and squeaky window reminding her just how far she had fallen. But instead of letting despair consume her, she decided to fight back, step by step,
with whatever strength she had left. She had no savings, no family support, and very little to hold on to. But she did have one gift: her hands. Since childhood, Laura had loved cooking. She had a talent for seasoning, for turning simple ingredients into meals that warmed the soul. When she closed her eyes, she could almost hear her mother's voice. Food made with love always finds a way to someone's heart. That memory sparked an idea. With the little money she had, she bought some basic ingredients. A kind neighbor lent her an old grill and a plastic table. Laura spent the night preparing pastries, fried snacks, and juices. At sunrise, she set up a small food stand on the corner of a busy plaza. The first day was hard. People walked past without stopping. Some recognized her and whispered behind her back, "Isn't that Henry's ex-wife, the one who couldn't have kids?" The word stung, but she kept smiling, determined to serve with kindness anyone who gave her a chance. Slowly, things began to change. A construction worker stopped for a quick snack. Then a bus driver came for a juice. Word started to spread. Laura's food wasn't just delicious. It had something extra. It carried care, warmth, and dignity. Soon, she began to see familiar faces every morning. Customers returned not just for the food, but for the way Laura made them feel seen. But it wasn't all easy. There were nights when she counted her coins and realized it wouldn't be enough to rent. Nights when exhaustion pressed down so heavily that she wanted to quit. In those moments, she remembered the doctor's words, "You are perfectly healthy." That phrase became her anchor.
Small victory, a reminder that she was more than Henry's cruel label. Day after day, her little stand grew into more than just a way to survive. It became her symbol of resilience. Each smile from a satisfied customer, each thank you, was like a brick in the new life she was building. Laura was no longer the woman abandoned and disgraced. She was a fighter, a provider, and, though she didn't know it yet, a woman about to experience love and transformation in ways she never imagined. As the days turned into weeks, Laura's little food stand slowly became a familiar sight in the plaza. Workers on their way to the office, students rushing to class, even families out for a stroll began stopping by. Her snacks and juices were more than food. They were comfort, made with hands that had known pain but refused to stop giving love. One crisp Friday morning, a man she had never seen before approached her stand. He was tall, with a calm presence and eyes that seemed both curious and kind. He looked at the menu board, then at her. "What do you recommend?" he asked with a polite smile. Laura, adjusting her apron, replied warmly, "If you trust me, try the chicken pastry with passion fruit juice. It's simple, but I make it with care." He nodded and took her suggestion. As he ate, he observed her, how she greeted every customer by name, how her smile never faltered, how she treated even strangers as if they were family. When he finished, he said quietly, "It's the best snack I've ever had. You can taste more than food in it. You can taste heart." His name was Daniel. At first, he was just another customer. But the next day, he returned, and the day after that. Soon, he began bringing colleagues along. It wasn't just the food that pulled him back. It was Laura herself. Laura, still carrying scars, kept her distance at first. She was polite, but reserved. Trust didn't come easily anymore. Yet Daniel didn't push. He showed up consistently with gentle words and small acts of kindness. One morning, he brought her a box of napkins for the stand. Another time, he helped carry her heavy bags of groceries. Slowly, she learned more about him. Daniel was a widower, a man who had loved deeply and lost too soon. He had no children, only memories and the quiet ache of loneliness. Two wounded souls, both marked by pain, began to find solace in each other. It wasn't a whirlwind romance. It was something deeper, built on respect, on laughter over small things, on shared silences that didn't need words. For Laura, it was the first time in years she felt seen not as a failure, not as the woman who couldn't have children, but simply as herself. Day by day, friendship blossomed into something more. And though she was careful, hesitant, her heart began to open again. For the first time since her marriage ended, Laura allowed herself to dream of a future filled not with rejection, but with hope. What she didn't know was that life was about to surprise her with something even greater than love, a blessing that would shake her world in the most unexpected way. Life had begun to take on a new rhythm for Laura. With Daniel by her side, her days didn't feel as heavy as before. They worked together at the food stand, laughed over little things, and planned small improvements for the future. For the first time in years, her life felt stable, even hopeful. But then came the unexpected changes. Laura started waking up with strange nausea, waves of fatigue that didn't match her usual hard-working nature, and a heightened sensitivity she couldn't explain. At first, she brushed it off. "It's just the long hours. I'm tired, that's all," she told herself. But Daniel noticed. "Laura, something's different. You're pale, you're exhausted. Please, let's go see a doctor." She hesitated, but his insistence won. A week later, she found herself lying on an examination bed, her heart racing as the doctor ran tests. The room was quiet, except for the rhythmic sound of medical equipment. Laura held her breath, bracing for bad news. Then, the doctor turned to her with a gentle smile. "Congratulations, Laura. You're pregnant." The words struck her like thunder. Pregnant! She blinked rapidly, her eyes filling with tears she didn't try to hold back. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Pregnant? I'm going to be a mother?" Daniel gripped her hand tightly, his own eyes shining with emotion. Before she could process, the doctor added, "And there's more. You're not expecting just one child. There are 3 heartbeats. You're carrying triplets." The world spun. Laura covered her mouth with her hands as sobs burst out of her. Triplets. The woman branded as barren by her ex-husband, humiliated and cast aside, was now carrying not 1, but 3 lives within her. Daniel pulled her into his arms, whispering, "You see? You were never broken. This is your blessing, your miracle." That night, Laura lay awake in her small room, her hands resting over her stomach,
Smiled through tears, whispering softly to the tiny lives growing inside her, "You are my proof. You are my victory." She didn't know how hard the journey ahead would be, raising 3 babies at once, but she knew one thing for certain. Her life had been rewritten. She was no longer the woman defined by rejection. She was a mother now, stronger, fuller, and blessed beyond measure. What Laura couldn't imagine yet was that this miracle would soon collide with her past in a way that would test every ounce of her newfound strength. The months of Laura's pregnancy were not easy, but they were the happiest of her life. Every ultrasound, every tiny flutter she felt inside her, was living proof that the cruel words Henry had once thrown at her were nothing but lies. She was not barren, she was a mother of 3 little miracles. Daniel was by her side through it all. He carried groceries, comforted her during restless nights, and spoke to her growing belly as if the babies could already hear his voice. For Laura, it was everything she had once dreamed of and thought she would never have. Love, family, and hope. But while Laura embraced this new chapter, someone else was seething in the shadows. Henry. When news of her pregnancy reached him, it struck like a dagger to his pride. The woman he had abandoned, the woman he had humiliated, was now living the very dream he had accused her of destroying. Worse still, she wasn't just having 1 child, she was expecting triplets.
For Henry, this wasn't just shocking, it was humiliating. His arrogance couldn't bear the thought that Laura had moved on, built a life, and was blessed in ways he could never have imagined. Instead of facing his own guilt, he made a cruel decision. He would find a way to humiliate her once more. That opportunity came with his new wedding. Days before the ceremony, Laura received an envelope with golden lettering. Her heart pounded as she opened it. Inside was an elegant invitation. "You are invited to the celebration of my marriage. I expect to see you there." Laura froze. Her first instinct was disbelief, followed by anger. How could he? What kind of man would invite his ex-wife to his wedding? But deep down, she knew the truth. This wasn't a gesture of kindness or civility. It was a trap. Henry wanted her to show up in simple clothes, to stand among his guests and feel small while he flaunted his new bride and his new life. Daniel saw the look on her face and asked softly, "Laura, are you going to go?" She placed her hand on her rounded belly, feeling the gentle kicks of her children, and her lips curved into a calm, steady smile. "Yes, Daniel, I'll go, but not the way he thinks." From that moment, Laura's decision was firm. She would walk into that wedding not as the broken woman Henry expected, but as the living proof of resilience, dignity, and triumph. And on that day, the past would finally face the truth it had tried to bury. The day of Henry's wedding arrived, and everything about it screamed wealth and pride. The hall was draped in white and gold, chandeliers sparkled above, and expensive cars lined up at the entrance. Guests arrived in their finest clothes, ready to celebrate Henry's new beginning. He walked through the hall with his usual arrogance, greeting people with the smugness of a man who believed he had everything under control. But deep inside, Henry was waiting for one moment. He could already picture it. Laura entering quietly, wearing something plain, standing at the back of the room while he and his bride shone in the spotlight. The humiliation would be complete. Yet what happened shattered his illusion. A low murmur spread among the guests as the sound of a powerful engine drew near. Outside, a sleek black Rolls-Royce pulled up. Heads turned. Cameras clicked. Whispers filled the air. And then, the car door opened. Laura stepped out. She wore a simple yet elegant dress that seemed to radiate grace. Her hair was perfectly styled, her posture steady, her eyes filled with confidence. But what truly stunned everyone was what she carried with her. 3 beautiful babies, her triplets, dressed with care and innocence. Gasps echoed through the entrance. "Is that Henry's ex-wife? Wait, she has children. Triplets?" Inside the hall, silence fell. As Laura entered, every step she took was deliberate, her head held high, her dignity shining brighter than all the chandeliers combined. Guests who once pitied her now looked at her with awe. Henry's face drained of color. His smirk disappeared, replaced by shock and shame. His new bride, confused, glanced at him, searching for answers he couldn't give. Laura walked calmly down the center aisle, the whispers around her growing louder. She didn't need to say a single word. Her presence spoke volumes. Here was the woman Henry had cast aside as worthless, now stronger, more radiant, and holding the very gift he had accused her of never being able to give: children.
Hall was electric. Some guests couldn't hide their admiration. Others whispered about Henry's arrogance and blindness. The bride's family exchanged uneasy glances, sensing the weight of scandal pressing down on the celebration. As Laura stood there, the room belonged to her. She had taken back her dignity, not with revenge or bitterness, but with undeniable truth. Henry's plan to disgrace her had backfired spectacularly. The stage was set, not for his victory, but for Laura's moment of triumph. And she knew it was time to speak. The hall was frozen in silence. All eyes were on Laura, standing tall with her 3 children in her arms. The air was heavy with tension, and the lavish wedding that was supposed to showcase Henry's pride now felt like the stage of his undoing. Laura took a deep breath. She hadn't planned a speech, but her heart knew it was time to speak the truth she had carried for years.
Her voice was steady, though it cut through the hall like a blade. For years, I was blamed. I was told I was barren, incapable, worthless. I carried the shame of a marriage that crumbled because I was accused of failing to give a child. But today, I stand here as a mother. And not just of one child, but of 3. These are my children, my miracle, my proof. The crowd erupted in murmurs. Some women covered their mouths in shock. Others shook their heads at Henry. A guest whispered loud enough for many to hear, "So the problem was never her." Henry's face burned red. He stepped forward, his voice trembling with desperation. "Enough, Laura! This isn't the place for this!" But Laura raised her hand, silencing him. Her eyes pierced into his with the calm authority of someone who had nothing left to lose. "No, Henry, this is exactly the place. Because you humiliated me in front of people. You painted me as a failure. You never even considered that the issue might not be mine. You never got tested. You chose the easier path, blame me, discard me, and move on." Gasps filled the hall again. The bride, horrified, slipped her hand out of Henry's arm. She looked at him with disgust and confusion, realizing the man she was about to marry wasn't the hero he pretended to be. Laura's voice softened but carried even more weight. "I didn't come here for revenge. I don't want your apology. I came to show that no one has the right to strip another person of their dignity. You broke me once, Henry, but I found my strength. I forgave you, but not for your sake, for mine, because I refuse to live chained to the past." The hall was filled with whispers, nods, even quiet claps of approval. Some guests looked at Laura with admiration, others at Henry with disdain. Henry, trembling, tried to reach for her, his voice cracking. "Laura, I was wrong. Please, forgive me." But Laura stood firm, her children in her arms, her head held high. "I already forgave you, Henry. But forgiveness doesn't mean going back. It means I am free. Free to live my life, to raise my children, and to never again let your words define me." In that moment, the man who once thought he held all the power was reduced to silence, and the woman he'd discarded stood before him as a symbol of resilience, courage, and undeniable triumph. The wedding hall never recovered from Laura's words. What was meant to be Henry's grand display of power and wealth had crumbled into shame and silence. Guests whispered as they drifted away from him, their eyes filled with judgment. The bride's family avoided his gaze, and the bride herself stepped aside, her face pale with humiliation. Laura, however, didn't need to stay any longer. She had spoken her truth. Holding her triplets close, and with Daniel by her side, she walked out of that hall with her dignity intact and her spirit finally free. Outside, she felt the cool evening breeze on her face. For the first time in years, she wasn't carrying the weight of shame. She was lighter. She was whole. Daniel looked at her tenderly. "Are you all right?" he asked gently. Laura smiled, tears glistening in her eyes. "Yes, Daniel. For the first time in a long time, I am at peace." The months that followed were challenging but filled with joy. Raising 3 babies at once was exhausting. Sleepless nights, endless diapers, cries that seemed to never end. But every smile, every tiny hand gripping her finger, reminded Laura that she had been blessed beyond measure. With Daniel's help, her little food stand grew. Customers who once came for snacks now came for full meals. Her warmth and stories spread through the community, and soon she opened a small restaurant. It wasn't just a business. It was a beacon of resilience. People came not only to eat, but to be inspired by the woman who had turned pain into power. One afternoon, Henry showed up at her restaurant. His arrogance was gone.
replaced by a man broken and ashamed. He begged for forgiveness, his words stumbling over themselves. Laura listened quietly, her face calm.
Finished, she answered softly but firmly. I forgave you long ago, Henry, but not to take you back. I forgave you so I could live free, so I could give my children the best of me without carrying the bitterness of the past. He lowered his head and left, his figure small and defeated. And for the first time, Laura felt nothing, no anger, no pain, just peace. She had overcome. Her scars remained, but they were no longer marks of shame. They were proof of her strength. She was no longer the woman abandoned and humiliated. She was a mother of 3 beautiful children, a respected businesswoman, and a woman who had found peace with herself. Every time she watched her children laugh and play, Laura thought to herself, what I once believed was the end was only the beginning of everything.